Have you ever picked up a fantasy novel that felt like it had the ambition of an epic video game series? A world filled with competing nations, unique magical powers, political conspiracies, ancient religions, and characters forced to choose between duty and compassion. That's exactly what I found when I opened Foes of Hope, the first book in the Adamas Chronicles by Brendon James. This isn't the kind of fantasy that eases readers into its world. Instead, it drops you into a civilization already shaped by centuries of conflict, powerful traditions, and moral gray areas. It asks you to pay attention, and if you're willing to invest the time, it rewards you with a surprisingly deep and layered story. Today, we're taking a spoiler-free look at what makes this ambitious fantasy stand out, where it occasionally stumbles, and whether it's worth adding to your reading list. I'm Danny, and this is the Hidden Book Nook, where we explore incredible books that deserve far more attention than they've received. Let's jump in. Foes of Hope is the opening novel of the Adamas Chronicles, introducing readers to the world of Adamas, a continent divided among powerful nations, each connected to its own deity, culture, and magical abilities known as Stachios. Rather than centering the story around a traditional chosen one, Brendon James focuses on multiple characters whose lives intersect as political tensions continue to rise. At the center is Pistis, a young warrior whose unwavering loyalty to her nation is tested by impossible decisions. From the opening pages, she's already carrying the emotional weight of having executed someone she loved because duty demanded it. That single event tells readers exactly what kind of story they're entering. This isn't a battle between obvious heroes and villains. It's a story about people trying to do what they believe is right, even when those beliefs put them on opposite sides of a war. One of the first things I noticed was just how much confidence this book has in its readers. Many fantasy novels spend chapters slowly introducing the rules of their world. Foes of Hope does almost the opposite. Within the opening chapters, you're introduced to multiple nations, political factions, religious beliefs, magical systems, military organizations, family rivalries, and an unfolding rebellion. It's a lot. Readers looking for a quick, light fantasy may initially feel overwhelmed, but readers who enjoy series like the Stormlight Archive, The Wheel of Time, or large-scale fantasy worlds will probably appreciate being trusted to piece things together naturally. The book expects readers to learn through context rather than lengthy explanations. That approach won't work for everyone. Personally, after settling into the rhythm of the story, I found myself appreciating how immersive the experience became. Instead of feeling like I was reading an encyclopedia, I felt like I had actually stepped into an already living world. Without question, world building is one of this novel's greatest strengths. Adamas feels incredibly expansive. Every nation has its own identity. Each possesses distinct traditions, different governments, different values, different relationships with magic. Rather than treating magic as one universal force, the story introduces the idea that each nation draws power differently through what are called stachios, abilities connected to deities and cultural identity. That immediately makes the world feel richer. Magic isn't simply about who has the strongest spell. It's tied to history, religion, politics, even family heritage. The opening pages include a guide explaining the 12 moons and the different stachio abilities available throughout the world. While some readers may glance over these pages before jumping into the story, I actually recommend taking a few minutes to read them. They provide valuable context that pays off throughout the novel. One aspect I especially appreciated was that Brendon James doesn't rely solely on magical spectacle. The cultures themselves feel distinct. Cities have unique personalities. Military forces operate differently. Social expectations vary from nation to nation. These details make the setting feel lived in instead of existing simply as a backdrop for action scenes. As someone who reads a lot of independent fantasy, I was impressed by just how much thought clearly went into constructing this world before the story even began. It feels less like a stage and more like an actual civilization with centuries of history waiting to be explored. Of course, a beautifully constructed world only matters if the characters give us a reason to care about it. And fortunately, that's where Foes of Hope begins to reveal one of its biggest emotional strengths. One of the things that kept me turning the pages was the cast of characters. This is very much an ensemble story. Rather than focusing on a single hero's journey, Brendon James gives us multiple perspectives from people who often have very different goals, loyalties, and beliefs. That structure makes the world feel much larger because every major character experiences the conflict from a different angle. Let's start with Pistis. She immediately stood out to me because she's not written as the typical fearless fantasy protagonist. She's disciplined, loyal, and exceptionally capable. But beneath that confidence is someone carrying an incredible amount of emotional weight. The novel opens by showing the lasting consequences of a decision she was forced to make years earlier. A decision rooted in obedience to her nation's laws rather than her own desires. That lingering guilt becomes one of the emotional foundations of her character. As the story progresses, she repeatedly finds herself caught between two competing ideas. Should she remain loyal to the traditions that shaped her life, or should she begin questioning whether those traditions deserve that loyalty? Those internal conflicts make her feel much more human than someone who's simply fighting monsters or collecting magical powers. Another character I found particularly interesting was Zale. Without giving away spoilers, Zale represents one of the novel's central questions. What happens when two people who genuinely care about one another come to completely different conclusions about what is right? His conversations with Pistis are some of the strongest moments in the opening chapters because neither side is presented as cartoonishly evil. Instead, both characters genuinely believe they're fighting for a better future, even if those visions can't coexist. That moral tension gives their relationship emotional depth and raises the stakes beyond simple good versus evil storytelling. Although Foes of Hope contains plenty of action, I don't think action is what the book is really about. At its heart, this is a story about belief. Specifically, what happens when faith, loyalty, family, and morality begin pulling someone in different directions. Throughout the novel, characters are constantly forced to ask themselves difficult questions. Is obedience always virtuous? Can tradition become harmful? Is peace something worth sacrificing justice? Can someone still be considered good if they're carrying out terrible orders? Those aren't questions with easy answers. In fact, one of the book's strengths is that it rarely gives readers simple solutions. Instead, it presents competing viewpoints and trusts readers to wrestle with them themselves. That's something I genuinely appreciated. Too often, fantasy stories clearly label one side as correct. Here, motivations are far more complicated. Even when I disagreed with a character's choices, I understood why they made them. That's an important distinction. Let's talk about Brendon James' writing style, because it's one of the most distinctive parts of his novel. The first thing you'll notice is just how ambitious it is. This isn't minimalist fantasy. The prose leans into detailed descriptions, expansive dialogue, political conversations, military planning, and extensive world building. James clearly enjoys creating a fully realized universe, and that enthusiasm comes through on nearly every page. Characters spend time discussing politics, religious beliefs, military strategy, cultural traditions, historical events. Rather than slowing the novel down for me, these conversations often made the world feel more authentic because they suggested there was a rich history existing long before Chapter 1. That said, readers should know this isn't a fast-paced action on every page fantasy. The book frequently pauses to allow readers to absorb new information, understand character motivations, or introduce another piece of the world's history. For readers who love immersive epic fantasy, that's probably a positive. For readers looking for nonstop battles, the pacing may occasionally feel deliberate. Another aspect I appreciate was the dialogue. Different characters tend to have their own speaking styles, which helps distinguish them from one another, despite the fairly large cast. Even secondary characters often leave memorable impressions because their personalities come through in conversation. I also found that James isn't afraid to trust his audience. He rarely over-explains. Instead, readers gradually assemble the larger picture through conversations, conflicts, and observation. That approach requires a little patience early on, but once everything starts fitting together, the world becomes increasingly rewarding to explore. When I first started Foes of Hope, I could immediately tell this wasn't trying to imitate the latest fantasy trend. It has its own identity, its own mythology, its own cultures, its own rules, and perhaps most importantly, its own voice. That's something I always appreciate when reviewing independent books. Rather than chasing what's popular, Brendon James has created a world that feels carefully planned and genuinely personal. You can tell an enormous amount of thought has gone into Adamas long before readers ever arrive there. Is it a perfect book? No. Like many ambitious first installments, there's a lot to absorb in the beginning, and some readers may need a little more time to settle into the world. But once the pieces begin fitting together, the story rewards your patience with memorable characters, meaningful conflicts, and a setting that feels alive. As the first book in a larger series, it succeeds at making me curious about what happens next. And honestly, that's one of the most important things a series opener can accomplish. If you've already read Foes of Hope, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Which character intrigued you the most? Did your loyalty shift as the story unfolded? And what are you hoping to see in the next installment of the Adamas Chronicles? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and I genuinely enjoy hearing your perspective. If you enjoyed discovering independent and overlooked books that deserve more attention, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the Hidden Book Nook, and ring the notification bell so you never miss another review. Thanks so much for watching. Until next time, happy reading!